Okay, we are live. What's today? Tuesday. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I am going to make sure that everything is live and ready, so that I can see it and I can. Yes, welcome to Beyond the White Couch. Talking tonight about the Black church, and I'm super excited to navigate this conversation. As you know, Beyond the White Couch was created for us to be able to have conversations that aren't not often had in the Black community, and issues that we do have that we can kind of tackle together with awareness, education, and just having the dialogue. So I'm super excited about talking about the Black church and mental health today, and I'm super excited to have Lakia with me to offer her insight from personal and professional perspective. I am going to let her do her own introduction in her own way, and then we'll go ahead and dive into the conversation.
Thank you so much, Sierra, for having me with you tonight. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Lakia Downs, and I am a licensed clinical social worker and therapist. And I own a private practice in Greenville, South Carolina called the SOAR Firm. And primarily, I work with a lot of adults who are dealing with issues like depression and anxiety, maybe some trauma, some transition issues with life. And a majority of the clients that I do see are Black people. In particular, that's the group of people that I tend to enjoy working with the most. And so a lot of the work that I do is centered around the Black experience. And one of the things that I'm very intentional about in my work with clients is decolonizing the way that therapy has traditionally been done. So, that has really challenged me to have to unlearn a lot of things that, I was taught in school and just in trainings, but really taking a more liberated, focused approach to working with Black people in therapy, in therapeutic settings. And like I said, centering the healing around those Black experiences. So that's primarily what I do. So yeah.
So you said something that was real big, and I wrote it down. And if you're in the space today, make sure you grab some paper, some a notebook or something to take notes, and just make note of any questions. Just be mindful, if you have questions, please drop them in the comments. Whether you're tuning in from my personal page, business page, or on YouTube Live, I'll be able to monitor the questions so that we have those. Feel free to, if you want to shoot us a personal message, if you have connections to us via Facebook or whatever, send that to us so that we can answer your questions if you're not comfortable with dropping them in the comments. But you said something about unlearning. And so as we navigate this conversation, just have an open mind that we are going to offer dialogue that probably challenges some of the things that you've learned, especially if you've grown up in a Black church. So we'll go ahead and get right into it with the first question. Mental health holds a big stigma in the Black community, especially the Black church. Where do you think this derives from?
So there's a couple of things I would say that I could kind of pinpoint. I think one of the first things that comes to mind is that usually when it comes to mental health issues, they're usually over spiritualized. And so when people are dealing with things like depression or anxiety, or maybe even symptoms as it relates to maybe some trauma, it's usually seen as, demonic. You're dealing with the spirit. We got to pray that out of you. We got to cast that demon out of you. Well, the thing is, oftentimes these things aren't rooted in spiritual issues, they're rooted in psychological issues. And so we have to remember that, we're comprised of mind, body, and spirit. So we can't necessarily always address, a mental challenge from a spiritual lens.
Mm.
Of course, depression does and can be something that, could be a spiritual issue, because then it could begin to affect, your beliefs about yourself, or, maybe how you see yourself in relation, to your relationship with God. But for the most part, most of these mental health challenges are rooted in something that's psychological. So I tell people, you're not going to go if you have a physical ailment, you go to the doctor. You see someone who's trained to handle and to care for those type of ailments. And so when it comes to psychological issues, we can't always look at it as it's something that's demonic, but it very well could be something that's psychological. And then another thing that comes to mind, when I think about just kind of the stigma around, mental health challenges and just mental health in general, I would definitely say just the historical mistreatment of Blacks in healthcare has definitely been a thing. And so people tend to, not really have a lot of trust in the system. They are uncertain or maybe have some reluctancy around, treatment options. What is this going to look like? Am I going to be on medication? Are they going to send me away? Because unfortunately, the way that people have been cared for who have had mental health challenges, we know hasn't always been the practices haven't always been the best. And so obviously with more research and more interventions that are out there now, we can actually as practitioners do a better job with making sure that we're caring for those people in as much as a delicate way as possible. And so just that mistrust in the system. And then just, misconceptions, people, I get it all the time, they'll say, well, I was just kind of afraid to go to therapy because I didn't want to be put on medication. That's not always going to be, a thing. And to be honest, as a practitioner, medication is a last resort for me. I usually is not even the first thing we talk about. And also too, as a practitioner, I really don't focus on diagnosing either. Because obviously with diagnoses, usually there's a label attached to that. And so when people are coming in, I'm really focusing and honing in on the issue.
Right.
What the actual root cause is, what are the things you're experiencing, because I don't want people to get attached or married to, a specific label. So I say all that to say, when people have this, negative perception about it, then I think that definitely continues to perpetuate, that stigma. So.
Yeah, and I like what you said at the beginning of, especially when you correlate, like even with diagnosing and from a clinical perspective, diagnosing, but then when you go from a spiritual element and somebody is labeling it demonic, it's like, what's the difference? Where's the balance between whatever's happening when you go to the church, which a lot of people in the Black community rely on, versus going to someone who can be a mental health professional who is licensed and trained to do these things? Then where does a person fall? Because now they're going to be literally out here blind because they don't trust the church because they've been labeled something. They don't trust the professional because they've also been labeled. So I think that something to be mindful of and aware of when you're looking for a mental health professional is having these types of dialogues of, am I going to be diagnosed? Because that doesn't have to be something necessarily that is communicated to you. It could be something that as a clinician they're aware of and how to treat you. However, it doesn't have to be something that you find as a label. And it's, again, going back to the spiritual side of things too, it works the same way. So just keep that in mind, again, as we're kind of navigating this conversation of looking at labels and how people are approaching it, because there has even from a spiritual side, or if you are part of a church or whatever, there's misconceptions and bad vibes and things like that people get from the church, but they still show up.
Yeah.
So
listen, faithfully.
So we're gonna move on into my next question, which is, a lot of times people think that spirituality and religion are the same thing. Can you kind of offer your perspective on understanding the difference and why it's important to understand the two?
So a particular quote that comes to mind when I think about that particular question is a quote by Deepak Chopra. And one of the things that he says that, religion is belief in someone else's experience. But spirituality is having your own experience. And so that is what I would definitely say separates the two, because, you know, spirituality is more of a personal journey. You know, it's like this inward journey that all of us, or at least many of us, are embarking on with connecting with self. Okay. Mm-hmm. So getting to know yourself, knowing who you are, knowing who you're not, knowing, you know, what's, you know, best for your highest good. And usually, you know, with our spirituality, there really aren't any rules that we're necessarily following. You know, we're more so like following our intuition, we're following, you know, our heart, and we're doing what we believe is in our best interest. Now, religion, on the other hand, you know, this is more institutional. Okay. And with religion, essentially, as a system, it was actually meant to enhance spirituality, but we've obviously kind of gotten away from that as a society. And so with religion, you know, is more so based on a set of rules and, you know, practices that pretty much guide your life. So depending on what, you know, religion you belong to, if you are Muslim, if you are Christian, if you're Buddhist, there are certain rules and practices that you engage in that essentially help guide your life, in hopes that it is going to enhance your spirituality. However, you can have people that are so religious that they're out of touch spiritually. And so they get to this place where they're so caught up in going by the rules that they don't even know who they are apart from that. They don't know who their identity is. They don't even know how to make decisions for themselves. And so I think we have to be careful. Like, yes, spirituality and religion can exist in the same space, but like I said, you know, being too religious, you know, can kind of place us in this box and, you know, essentially create other barriers to just knowing who we are as well. So
can you run the quote back?
Yeah.
Because, I see, so I don't know why I can't see my comments on here, but I'm on Facebook and I can see you know, people talking about in the comments, but I'm gonna need you to run the quote back, because I think it's really important to understand religion and spirituality when we talk about the Black church and mental health. So let's run that back.
Okay, so the quote is by Deepak Chopra, and for those of you who don't know who Deepak Chopra is, he's a well-known author, kind of like a meditative expert, definitely kind of a guru as it relates to like spirituality. But one of the things that he talks about is, he says that religion is belief in someone else's experience, and spirituality is having your own experience. So religion is belief in someone else's experience,
right,
and spirituality is having your own experience. Because if you think about it, like the different practices and the rules that, you know, guide religion are created by people, right? Based off of what works for, you know, what they deemed appropriate, what they saw, you know, was beneficial and helpful, right?
Their perspectives, their interpretations, their everything when it comes to that. So even, and I'm going to keep bringing this back to mental health, because it's so critical that you understand that even for somebody who maybe have depressive symptoms or anxiety, for that is subjective to each of those individuals. Now we got a book, and I wish I had it, and it's a big book.
I gave mine away.
that basically has this criteria of what you have to have, or so many whatever after that. But you have to understand that a person who is depressed doesn't have to be somebody who is just sitting in their room and, you know, crying or drinking out of a bottle. Sometimes that could be your overachievers, or some, you know, like there is levels to this. So when you look at religion and spirituality and you talk about religion being the beliefs of somebody else, it's levels to that, because what you believe, because we could read the Bible, quote out the Bible, and you could interpret it one way, and I could turn around and interpret it another way. And it's just like, but we just read the same thing. So who is right? Both of us. The same way it's like if you put two people beside each other and one person shows depressive symptoms this way and another person shows depressive, it's not like, well, oh, you more depressed than I am. No, like, I mean, it shows up different. So I definitely think just even looking at that quote and just looking at it from a perspective, if you even take away religion and spirituality, what is somebody telling you an experience? Are you experiencing something for yourself? And a lot of times with what we experience in the church is that if it's not somebody's direct experience, they don't understand it. So then it goes back to the labels of demonics and you got to pray that away and all of these things. And it's just like, but how are you going to speak from a perspective that you're unfamiliar with?
Yeah. Ooh, and to add to that, I think you brought up a really good point when you're giving the comparison about like the depression example. I mean, the DSM-5 is very subjective.
Very.
And furthermore, it wasn't a lot of groups of people weren't necessarily considered when these things were created. And so you bring up a really good point about like, I think we have to really be open, because I can even remember like in thinking about as I was kind of preparing for this, and years ago, I don't know if any of y'all know of Samuel Cartwright, but he was well known. I think he was a physician. I don't even think he was a psychiatrist. But he was a well-known doctor at the time during, 1800s, I think. But he coined the term drapetomania. And some of you may have heard of that term. But drapetomania was actually, and this was an actual psychological diagnosis, right, that they would attach to enslaved Blacks, right? Mm-hmm. And so they considered it, like this form of mania. And so it was pretty much attached to enslaved Blacks who wanted to run away or who ran away from their white masters. And so the idea was that, if they were running away, that they were running away from what they would consider, a good life. And so they obviously, there was something wrong with them, because to be enslaved, there's something great about that, what's good about being oppressed, but that was the belief. And this was an actual diagnosis that they would attach to Black people. So of course that isn't, a thing now, but that just lets you know, going back to, just kind of that whole idea of how we interpret things. I just believe that a lot of things are very subjective. And so, but I also believe that even in the difference in our interpretation, get what it means to you. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, get what it means to you. Because what it might mean to Aunt Sue might be different for what it means, for you. Right. And I think that's where the whole spirituality piece comes in. Being, I guess what I'm trying to say is understanding you, what is in your best interest. Yes, I think that religion has its place in helping to guide, our lives, to a certain degree. But I think when you have that spirituality piece missing, then it's almost like you're a robot. Yeah. You're conforming to everybody else's beliefs but your own.
Yeah. That's good. Mm-hmm. That's good. So yeah, if you ain't on live and you watching it back, just write that down. Just if you don't take away nothing else, take down that quote and just Deepak Chopra is literally, he like the GOAT. Okay, like he one of the GOATs, and so I definitely that quote in itself just speaks so much volumes in so many different ways. But kind of moving on to the next question, an unfamiliar term that I think that a lot of people don't know about is religious trauma. Can you talk about what religious trauma is and what that could look like?
Yes. So religious trauma is pretty much the result of spiritual abuse. And so the religious trauma is pretty much the impact or the effects that it has on a person's life, after, they've experienced the spiritual abuse. So I think first, it's important to understand, okay, well, what is spiritual abuse? Many people would probably say, that spiritual abuse is rooted in power and control, because essentially that's what it is. It's with any type of abuse, whether it's physical abuse, mental abuse, spiritual abuse, it's all rooted in this idea that, we want to control how you think, we want to control how you behave, all of those things. So with spiritual abuse, oftentimes, it attacks people's core values. It creates fear. It really can take away a person's agency and even their identity. Mm-hmm. People can begin to develop negative beliefs about themselves, like God doesn't love me because of my sin. And people who are in environments where there is spiritual abuse going on. And what I mean by that is, a lot of, and I'm not saying this is all churches, but, there are some churches and just some people in general that hyper focus on certain sins. Mm-hmm. And so, sins like homosexuality, fornication, even purity culture, that has become a thing. And so when there is a hyper focus on these issues and we're constantly, as we would say, beating people over the head with the Bible, what that does is that creates shame. Yes. People begin to feel depressed, like, man, I'm not enough, or I'm not doing enough. Clearly, I can't get this right. Clearly, I keep messing up, right? And so sometimes some churches, not all churches, but some churches can actually create the mental health challenges. Mm-hmm. And so, if a person is, having these negative beliefs about themselves and thinking that God is just frowning upon them, who wouldn't feel sad? Who wouldn't feel hopeless? So there are people that, because of spiritual abuse, they might end up experiencing like PTSD. Mm-hmm. They might even feel isolated, right. And we know that as Black people, community is an Afrocentric value. Like, that is important to us, to have community. But when you feel isolated, that can lead, to other things. So, and oftentimes too, people might not even realize that, they're even in a spiritually abusive environment until they leave. Right. And that was kind of my experience. I have been in an environment that was spiritually abusive. And it wasn't until, I finally decided to leave that I realized, I was like, this is not right. Right. And here I am as a therapist. I'm beating myself up like, girl, why didn't you see this? Like, what? How did you not know? Right. But, I struggled, for a while after that, just with wrestling with, just my identity. Like, okay, well, who am I now? Mm-hmm. Because sometimes what happens is in churches, churches can be a lifeline for a lot of people. And that's the thing, that the church has always been a core space for healing, for support, for our community for ages. Yeah. But unfortunately, there have been some, religious spaces that have taken advantage of that. Right. And so for some people, going to church is their lifeline. This is what helps them to keep going. But when people are going to these spaces, they're already dealing with the stuff from the world. The world is already what it is. But then going into these spaces and being manipulated, mm-hmm. Being shamed for being who they are. Yeah, let's say you do like someone of the same sex or the same gender, but you're shamed for that, and that, like I said, that can create a lot of issues. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people end up leaving, because there isn't a space for them anymore. And I think a lot of times too, what you experience when you have those hyper-focused areas that people tend to focus on, and they start to shame and create this dynamic, they take the Bible, pieces of the Bible, and then throw you one piece of it, but don't show you the whole context. Yep. And so then it's like, that ain't what it said. It didn't say that. Or try to send you to a place they ain't got no authority to send you to. Like, sir, ma'am, you can't send me to hell. if it even exists. So
But then when you start to pick and choose what applies and what doesn't apply, a lot of times, what I believe is that when you begin to heal, you have to automatically begin to self-reflect. Mm-hmm. And in any position of power or of influence or authority, before you decide that you're going to make a judgment or cast a stone, whatever, you have to turn it, hold the mirror up to yourself, because I'm pretty sure there are things that people who are in the church or who are in these positions of power who have done things that maybe people just aren't aware of. But because they feel like, oh, I'm changed, I'm saved, and all of this, it's just like, you don't know, you can't erase where you grew from.
Right.
So then you don't turn around and do that to somebody else. And I mean, I even have my own experience with that. I remember getting pregnant for the first time, and I will never forget a first lady, she came at me hard. I was so blown away that it was just like, how could you call yourself a woman of God and that's how you come at me? Mm-hmm. Now, thankfully, I was in a good place in my life where I didn't have to check her like that. I just had to, I literally had to pray, you know what? I'm not going to allow her to have that type of control to get me out of my character and in my feelings no more than she already had. But it's like, for a while, I was like, yeah, I don't need to go to church. If that's what you're going to, if she feels like that, then the next person going to judge me too. And so I don't need to be sitting in a church and I ain't married with my baby. And now y'all all got something to say. No, I don't got nothing to say to y'all. So I'm just not going to go. Right. And so I think that a lot of times those types of things happen. And just like you said, especially with our generation, we ain't got to deal with that. We know we don't have to deal with that. So we don't. But then it's just like, oh, the young people so lost and da 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 da.
No, we finding the truth. That's what it is.
No, we actually out here setting boundaries and understanding what is really healthy for our mental health. And and like you said, when you are outside of a situation and you're able to evaluate things that have been said or done to you, especially from a religious or spiritual aspect in that realm, when you get away from it, it's because when you start to experience spirituality and your personal relationship for yourself, it's personal. Mm-hmm. Religion ain't personal. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So why would I jeopardize what's personal for me? What I know is all right, now I have to be responsible for me, because at the end of the day, it's going to be me and him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why jeopardize that at the expense of, oh, that's how you was raised. I was brought up in the church. I was this, I was that. And it's just we are in a space now where we have the flexibility to choose.
Yeah.
You have the power to choose. You are at liberty to choose. And I'm going to choose me and my mental health any day.
Yeah.
Any day. And that's important for people to just understand when you're if you don't know if you've been exposed to religious trauma or think that or religious, experience religious abuse, and you just have to really sit back and think about what is your experience, because that's personal, not masking it by this is how I was raised, or I know I got to do this, or whatever. Yeah.
And just because we were taught some things doesn't always mean it was right.
Yes.
And that's where the whole unlearning comes in, because there were a lot of things, we were probably told growing up, just in general, but as you become an adult, you're like, no, this really isn't right. Or this just doesn't fit, my life. Yeah. So I think it's important to realize that and be okay with challenging and asking the hard questions. And I think that's why a lot of times when it comes to I'm going to speak for the millennials, because I'm a millennial. Right. That's why every young person is not a millennial.
Right.
I know something. Most of us are hitting 40 at this point. We almost.
We getting close.
Yes. So, I think about just asking the hard questions, because many of us were brought up, and told, don't question God. If something is going on, you don't question God. Where do you think that stems from? That's rooted in oppression. That is rooted in power and control. It's do as I say, not as I do. Take whatever is given to you. Don't ask why. Don't ask any questions. Just take it and go and run with
That's it.
That's it. And so now, and then people wonder why we have a generation of people or young people that don't know how to think critically for themselves. You never created a space for that. You never created a space for us to have those critical conversations and, ask those difficult questions. And oftentimes I know people didn't want those questions asked because honestly, they probably didn't even know the answers.
Yeah.
It was easier to just to say, don't ask, because I really don't know the answer. So I think now a lot of us are really doing our own work and seeking our own answers in other forms and in other spaces. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all, because I think that obviously, knowledge is power. The more you know, the better you can become. Right. And when people are constantly like resisting that, then that to me means like you're not trying to grow. You're not trying to evolve. You just literally want to, control people and control how they think and control how they show up. And that's it.
Right. And it's funny that you talk about like even like the you don't question God or whatever. Even when we think about unlearning those behaviors as it relates to the religious and the church aspect of it. I mean, think about us as kids. If you ask why we doing something, don't ask me why.
Just answer the question.
And as a parent, and that can oftentimes be seen as disrespectful. Yes. But is it?
Yes.
Is it? Because if you go in a job and there's something you need to know how it works, you're going to ask because you need to know. Yes. A lot of times with kids, they're literally just seeking understanding.
That's it.
So when you decide to question something, maybe it's in the Bible, or maybe it's a religious practice, or maybe it's a tradition or something that's in the church, it's literally why is seeking understanding. It's not a disrespect. It's not saying that, oh, I'm trying to challenge. It's literally, I want to understand. Mm-hmm. And we were given the ability to understand. Like that's part of life. Right? Like that's a part of who we are as human beings. And I think that a lot of times that people who hold titles, whether it's in the church or outside of the church, when you strip yourself of that, we know different. Mm-hmm. We're literally no different. So I'm a human just like you're a human. And so if we on the same playing field, a lot of times, even as a mental health professional or therapist or whatever people call themselves, at the end of the day, we ain't always gonna see it how we were taught in school or what we know to might be the right way, because one, it's not one size fits all.
Exactly.
And at the end of the day, we are human too.
Yeah.
We are human too. And I think don't forget that. Y'all human too.
That's right.
So many times, you have people say you can't have faith, or you got to pray, and you can't do this and have a therapist too. I think you hear that a lot, that all you need is prayer, all you need is your faith, and that's where it stops. Going to get help and all that is not necessary. It doesn't need to be a part of the equation. So like when you hear that perspective, like what comes to mind for you? And then the second part of that is, how do we change that narrative?
So I think that, struggling with your mental health doesn't mean that you lack faith. Like that's not an indicator that your faith is weak or it's not strong enough. I think we have to remember at the end of the day, we are all human. So we go through human experiences. Mm-hmm. And like I said, when people have physical ailments or people are diagnosed with things, there's always an encouragement, like go to the doctor, go get checked out, Usually prayer, let's just pray about it and leave it at that, usually isn't the response. We're getting medications that more than likely gonna cause other issues anyways, but that's neither here nor there. But prayer, is not always enough.
Right.
Prayer is not always enough. Prayer can definitely be helpful and can definitely be a tool to help, expand our faith and being able to work through and get through and navigate whatever it is we're going through. But it isn't always, the main and primary or the only answer. Sometimes professional help is needed.
Right.
And so, as I was saying earlier, we can't just demonize or over spiritualize, mental health issues, but we have to treat them or, look at them from, the mental or the psychological lens. And I think one of the things too is that a lot of people just aren't knowledgeable. One of the things you were saying earlier is that, depression can look different for different people. So like you said, some people may be thinking, okay, depression is, just sitting in your room all day, not getting up and not doing things. But you have people who are high functioning people, but are depressed, right? They've just really gotten really good at masking, the signs. So when people aren't really knowledgeable about what signs to look for, or if they suppress their own struggles.
Okay.
Usually when people suppress their own struggles, they gonna minimize and suppress yours too.
Right.
They usually ain't gonna encourage you to, seek support or get outside help. So I think that, just because you have depression doesn't necessarily mean that you're not a good Christian, or doesn't mean that you don't have enough trust in God. I mean, I believe God created people here in this earth to support, people in, these kind of situations, just like we have healthcare professionals, using wise counsel, because we don't know everything. We don't know all there is to know. And then two, a lot of times what I have realized and what I have found out is that people don't even really have a basic knowledge of how the brain works. And so when you don't even have a basic knowledge of how the brain works and how your nervous system operates and how those two connect together, then I think it is easier for people to just minimize it and, just like I said, over spiritualize it and just say, oh, you just need to pray about it. It's a spirit where we're going to pray that out of you. When really and truly, this really may be something physical as well as psychological that needs to be treated.
Right. And I think that, just like you said earlier, when you talk about the mind, body, soul, spirit, whatever terms that you use, sometimes you have to let them operate independently, because when somebody gets or diagnosed with something severe like cancer, you don't tell them, well, don't go get chemo, or don't even go get evaluated to get the diagnosis, and just let it. That's not what you do. That's not the average story, right? You don't do that. So why is it that you pick and choose when you can apply that same concept, but it comes down to, now it's not about the physical body, it's about your mind. And people are not aware that how chemical imbalances and your nervous, all of these things, developmental issues and all of that, a lot of times that's just how it is. It just is how it is. And so there are resources available that can help you navigate through, just like if you were physically sick, there are resources that are available that can help you navigate through to get better, because that's the goal. The goal is to be able to have your mind, body, soul, spirit connected as one, so that you're functioning, operating at your best. Not that, oh, I'm going to be strong in my faith, but I have cancer and I ain't going to do nothing about it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
And I'll be honest too, like, to add to that, usually in the physical healthcare system and medical, system, it's not about healing. It's about pacifying the symptoms. And so, I find it interesting how a lot of times people are quick to run to the doctor. They will take all these medications, do what the doctor says, and they trust the doctor who is a practitioner just like everyone else, but don't trust a therapist to help them work through, challenges. And oftentimes in the work that I do, my goal in a lot of cases, and a lot of people that I work with, if they are on medication, typically my goal is to help them get to a place where they don't have to use it anymore. And that's where we bring in a lot of like holistic practices and interventions. Because it's not to say that medication, and this is not to say medication cannot be helpful. It can be helpful. Each case is different. Each person is different. But what I have just found in my experience and in my work is that people become very dependent sometimes on medications, whether it's for psychological challenges or physical challenges, when there are alternatives out here that we can use to help us heal. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. And I think we already covered this question, and I just got a notification that it wasn't public. It's public now. I just changed the settings, so now I know. So please feel free to share the video. It's now public, so you can share it. I don't know what happened because I thought I changed my privacy settings earlier, but so I think we covered my next question about just talking about chemical imbalances, exposure to trauma, and that. But in that, my question was, how might mental health professionals, those who have the desire or who are deep in the church and church leaders, how can everybody work together?
I think first and foremost, obviously education is very important. So even as like religious leaders and spiritual leaders, if you don't have a working knowledge or at least a basic knowledge on, just mental health in general, which obviously is the health of the mind. But if you don't have a basic knowledge of, just some basic mental health challenges, like signs to look for, then I would definitely encourage leaders to get trained. Because the thing is, many people are going to their spiritual leaders to talk about issues that are really beyond their scope. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the issues that people are going to their pastors to talk about are not some in nature may be spiritual, but some may not. Some may be psychological. So when you have a leader who's saying, okay, well, we're just going to pray about this and we're going to, put some oil, we're going to anoint you, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, but they're still leaving out the same way. Or if we're shaming people or people are believing it's something that they've done, that can actually cause, maybe their situation to be a lot worse. So I think just educating, churches bringing in mental health professionals. I do see that a lot more now, which I'm very excited to see churches partnering with, therapists or other mental health organizations, or really bringing awareness like during Mental Health Awareness Month, and just really helping parishioners understand the importance of it's okay to not be okay. Just like a physical ailment, some of us have some mental, challenges. And if we honest, we all got something mentally going on. Right. Sometimes it's just not professionally diagnosed, but we all have something that we struggle with from time to time, or may have struggled with for, a while. So just really partnering together, like I said, with outside agencies, bringing those people in to talk with your congregants, I think is a great way to help kind of bridge that gap and just really to normalize it.
Mm-hmm. And I think too that a lot of times, so there are things like mental health first aid. And if you're not familiar with that, it literally, I took it before I got my professional training, and it literally just gives you at least something to be like, all right, I can pay attention to these types of behaviors so that you're aware. I think that education is definitely first and foremost of being able to recognize, okay, something might be deeper than what I'm used to dealing with, and advocating for that, because a lot of, especially the Black community, trusts their leaders in the church. Like, that trust is deep. And so when you have your leader speaking openly about it, whether or not that's your experience of what you're actively doing, but if you can be like, hey, look, sometimes, because I spoke at a church one day, and I was very honored to have that opportunity, and they came up to me after and was just like, sometimes people come to us and we don't know what to do. I thought that was the most authentic, the most like it was just everything. And it was just like, we need somebody to funnel people to, because sometimes it's more than we can handle. And I think that doesn't show weakness. It doesn't show that as a leader, you're incapable of doing the work of the Lord or whatever. It shows that, you know what? I know that there are resources available that can help you get where you need to be outside of just independently working with me and praying and doing whatever. And I think that's so important. So when you talk about those resources, or, you know, how the church can work together, it's literally using like all of these things to work together because they're available for a reason. You know, I believe, and this is what I believe in. When I was in school, this is something that one of my professors told me. I don't think that everybody can be a mental health professional.
No.
Okay. There's a lot of people out here saying that they are, who can't really do the job. There's a lot of mental health professionals who do more harm than good, just like there are in the church. But I really do feel like you have to be called to be effective in this field, just like you be called to the pulpit, right? There are ways that you minister that may not have a label of a pastor or a bishop. It don't have to be all. It don't have to be that. Sometimes your calling and what you're supposed to do is in a different form, and being mindful of that in itself just really takes the capacity of how we all can work together to a new level. Because I'm operating in my, like, I ain't going to stand on a pulpit and try to teach nobody the word. I ain't doing it. I'm not doing that. Nobody would trust me to do that, because I'm gonna lead you wrong. But now when it comes to this mental health thing, I got your back. Okay. So I think just operating in that space and just understanding that the resources are available for a reason, and you have to utilize them.
And that's a really good point. And it made me think about how there has been a lot of burnout with like pastors and religious and spiritual leaders. And I think a lot of it is because they are trying to take on so much from their congregation. And they're not using their support network. They're not using the community. And as a leader, and anybody that's in the helping profession, this is just for anybody in the helping profession, we have to know how to stay in our lane. And you pretty much said it, earlier. Everybody can't be a mental health professional. So just like I'm not called to be a doctor, so I'm not gonna, play doctor.
Right.
So right. And even as a therapist, if I have a client who, okay, we've been doing some work together, but maybe I'm noticing like, okay, we're not really, getting any breakthroughs, or maybe I don't have what they need, I am not afraid to refer out. And I'll have that conversation. I'm like, listen, I think that I have exhausted, the support that I can give. And I think you may be better off with someone who is more specialized in the area that you need. So, because I'm not going to burn myself out trying to support someone or, work beyond my scope.
Right.
That's just the thing. And so if leaders, just have resources available, like have a list of people that you can refer to, have conversations, with these therapists or with these community organizations, so that you get an understanding of what they do, how they can support your congregation. And that way we're not being burnt out, because number one, as you said earlier, boundaries. And a lot of times that's something we don't really do well with in our community, is boundaries. We're taught you always got to show up for people. You always have to give, you always have to be there. But as we've talked about earlier, you got to be able to connect with yourself, and you can get lost in other people's stuff. So making sure that, you have those boundaries and you set those boundaries, not only with others, but with yourself. And my clients know, like, listen, I'm gonna give you what I got now. I'm gonna give you my best. I ain't gonna let you stress me now.
Right. Absolutely. So, what are your top 3 reasons every Black person should go to therapy?
I would say, I think one reason every Black person should go to therapy is I think that therapy with the right therapist can help us connect the past to the present. In order for us to kind of get a better understanding of, why we may be the way that we are and why we might be showing up the way that we're showing up. Because oftentimes, the ways in which we show up usually are connected to past experiences. So helping to kind of dig into some of that and explore some of that, and figure out how to, find some resolve or some closure or some healing around that, I think can be beneficial. So that we can move forward and, into evolving into, the best version of ourselves. I think that therapy can also help us discover, who we are. Because as we talked about earlier, many of us are taught, this is who you are. This is, how you're supposed to show up. We aren't really given that agency or that autonomy to think for ourselves. So I think in these therapeutic settings, you're empowered to be able to do that, and really discover who you are, what you like, what works best for you. It's not about pleasing other people, but it's about doing what's going to serve your highest good. And then also, I think, therapy can help us learn, new tools, how to work through different challenges and find different solutions, because we don't know it all.
Right.
So, oftentimes we're using old tools that are outdated that may not work for the situation we have, in the present moment. And so I think therapy can help us to explore new tools, new ways of thinking and looking at things, to just help us better navigate it. And I know you said 3, but I think the 4th one too is, as a community, we've been exposed to so much trauma, systemic racism, intergenerational trauma, and many of us don't even realize we could be carrying some of that. And so I think it's important, for us to kind of explore that in these, safe spaces, and to be able to work through that and heal.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna run these back, because in case y'all ain't listening or you catching a replay or whatever, I think it's important that, like, showing up in this space is one thing, but when you take and apply and really like share this with somebody else, or you like sit down and have these conversations with your circle, your family, your church leaders or whatever, it starts to create dialogue. And that is what starts to create change. We can't change nothing if ain't nobody willing to talk about it. And this is, again, what Beyond the White Couch is about. And again, the Black church is a staple in our community. That is something that a lot of people rely on. But even connecting past with present, just like you talked about, it was used as a weapon. Religion was used as a weapon during slavery. So understanding that and being able to even start that conversation, because it's like, well, then, and you start to create dialogue to just even open up about that, to be able to broaden your perspectives. And I'm really big on discovering who you are, because a lot of people don't know. They've been taught or told, and like you said, not given the opportunity to create whoever it is, discover who they are to the core. And that's a problem, because if you don't show up in the world as you, again, you remember we talked about this religion versus spirituality, somebody else's experience versus your own, hand in hand. Okay, we're just talking about it in a different way, versus taking away the label of religion and spirituality, and you're living life as or for somebody else and not having your own experience. We only get one life, y'all. We only get one. And learning new tools, there's not one way to do nothing. I'm pretty sure like how you work with your clients is one way, and how I probably show up for my clients is a totally different way, right? But does that mean that either of us are not effective?
Right.
No. There's more than one way to do things, and there's more than one way to get results, especially when it comes to your mental health. It is not one size fits all. Some people think you just gonna go lay on the couch and you gonna fall back, and it's not when you come talk to me. It ain't like that, okay? It's not like that. So it's not gonna be like that. And and I think a lot of times TV and movies and social media has this depiction of what therapy and how that looks, and it's just like, actually, no. Sometimes you ain't gonna like your therapist because they gonna call you out and they gonna be like, nah, that ain't it. You know what I'm saying? So it varies how that looks, but again, there's no one size fits all to anything in life, but definitely when it comes down to mental health as well. So those are all really good points. So make sure y'all run that back, write those down, share that with somebody else who might be on the fence or whatever. I want to see if we have any questions. I can see the comments now. But I'm gonna make sure I don't have any questions before I let you share your how people can get engaged with you, connect with you, if they're looking to get services, all of that. So I don't have any questions so far. Do you have any questions on your end that you may have gotten?
I don't.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So let the people know how they can get in contact with you and connect with you.
So I am on Facebook. My business page is The SOAR Firm. That's SOARFIRM. So I am on Facebook as well as Instagram under The SOAR Firm. So there is some content on both of those pages. And I also have a YouTube channel, which I haven't done videos in a long time, but there is still some relative content on there that you could check out. But my YouTube page is also under The SOAR Firm as well. And my website is www.thesoarfirm.com. So those are the places in which you can reach me.
Awesome. So before I let you go, I want to just say thank you for joining and bringing your authentic self to Beyond the White Couch. I do believe that this dialogue is very important, and based on the comments and the shares, I know that people found great value. For those of you who are still tuned in, please drop in the comments like what you took away from the conversation, how you feel now, what you feel. If it was good for you, drop us some context in the chat to let us know how you felt about this session of Beyond the White Couch. And can you leave anybody with, whoever's still joining or those who catch the replay, what is one final thought or advice or something that you would leave them with for tonight?
I would definitely say, as it just relates to taking care of your mental health, do what works for you. And I think, as we talked about, there's no one size fits all. And I think that sometimes we have to use a combination of practices and tools. So whether that's, exercising, whether that's engaging in yoga, whether that's doing meditation, whether that's engaging in other healing practices, whatever you need to do that works for you and that speaks for you. So oftentimes, we're trying to do what works for other people, but that may not be what we need. So I think that's definitely one thing I would want to leave with people. And I think that kind of falls in line with that whole spirituality. It's personal. It's about you. It's about doing things and discovering practices that are going to help you to become, the best version of yourself. So.
Absolutely. It's personal, y'all. The journey is personal. So take it personal and embrace whatever that looks like. for you. So I just again want to say thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me tonight. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in, and if you're catching the replay, thank you so much for joining. Next week we have Beyond the White Couch relationship-ish with Sunny, and we are going to talk about Black relationships, and I'm excited for that. I'm excited for that one as well. I definitely got some dope Black women to the table to talk about these topics. And so, yeah, I'm excited. So next week, same time, same place, we're going to get together these, how to see these comments and stuff. But I definitely appreciate y'all for tuning in. If you haven't already shared it, make sure you share it. Tag somebody who you think can benefit from just listening to the conversation, because like I said, education and communicating, engaging in this dialogue is definitely the first step on how we change the narrative of mental health, especially in the Black community. So until next week, y'all have a good night.
Bye.